Hey everybody, welcome back to CIS 39. Today we're going to be covering lesson number 8, shader construction. And even though it says digital tablet primer and homework number 3, we're not going to do that. So I can't assume that all of you are going to be using digital tablets, and I also needed some resources to do this assignment that are back in my office, which is on lockdown. So you guys are not going to do homework assignment number 3. But we will talk about how to create a simple shader in Maya to create a detailed looking model. Alright, so let's head over to lesson number 8. So for this lesson, there are step-by-step directions here in the Word document that you can use. And we will be using these two files in the project. And then, as I said, we can just disregard all of this. We won't be doing the digital tablet primer this semester. Now, it's also worth noting, I'm going to go ahead and open up this document, which is here on my desktop. It's worth mentioning that there are steps in this document that you're not going to be able to, well, you might be able to do if you have Photoshop, but that I'm not going to be able to do because I do not have Photoshop on my computer at home. Well, actually, I do have Photoshop. You can see it right there. But for some reason, when I go to try to log in, I keep getting an error message. I think it might have something to do with the fact that my computer is not attached to the school's network for the licensing part of Photoshop. So in any case, way down here at the bottom, it talks about opening stuff in Photoshop. And like I said, we're not going to be able to do those steps. So we will do a workaround to it. And for you guys, you can't stop when you finish the steps here for bringing the maps into Maya, which I'll show you in the video to apply the maps to your low poly model. So today we're going to be using both Maya and Mudbox. We're going to start in Maya with our low poly version of our model, and we're going to export that over to Mudbox. And we're also going to bring a high level or high res version of the model into Maya to export over into Mudbox. And we're going to be baking all of our maps, our normal map and our something called an ambient occlusion map over here, over in Mudbox. All right, so to start things off, I'm going to make a new project. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this Toad project. And for you guys, you can just save it wherever you feel comfortable. I'm just going to put this on the desktop because I'm going to be deleting it when I'm done. And from there, we're going to download these two files into our scenes folder for our project that we just created. So I'm going to go to the desktop where I created my project and then go into my scenes folder and save both of those files into the scenes folder for my project. All right. So next I'm going to go ahead and open up the low frog. Why is high not there yet? There he is. Okay, just a delay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the low frog. This is a same Toad model. Actually, I didn't show you guys this model yet, I don't think. All right, so this is the Toad model that we're going to be using. This is the low poly version. And what we're going to do is we're going to create something called an FBX file. An FBX file is a portable file type that you can use in both Maya and Mudbox. So Maya uses .mb files, but FBX files can be used in either Maya or Mudbox. So that's how we're going to transport stuff back and forth between the two applications. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and choose to export the current selection. And we'll choose options for that. Okay, you want to make sure up here that you choose FBX file export, and then click on export selection. And then under your options over here, the only option that you need to change is under geometry. You want to make sure you turn on smoothing groups and turn off everything else. And then we're going to go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call this low poly FBX. Note that it's going to go into the scenes folder for my project. And then export selection. Okay. Next, we're going to do the same thing for the high-res version of the frog. Okay. So same thing, file, export selection. And then these options should be there for you. So we'll just call that high poly. All right. For now, we're done with Maya, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave it running in the background as I move over to Mudbox. Okay, next, we're going to go ahead and open up those two FBX files that we just created. But before we do that, under Windows and under Preferences, you want to make sure that under FBX that you have the option to import materials and textures turned off. The reason for that is that we don't want to use the Blinn or Lambert materials that are assigned to the models over from Maya. We want Mudbox to apply its own material to the model. So we make sure that's turned off. Next, we're going to go ahead and go to File, and then Open, and then browse to our project, Toad project, to our scenes folder where we saved both of those FBX files. And we'll start by opening the low poly guy. There he is. And then we're going to go ahead and instead of choosing File Open, this time we're going to choose File Import so that way we can have both models in the same scene. And we'll import the high poly version. And if you do get this error message, then you can just hit OK. It's not a big deal. Okay, so we have our low poly toad highlighted in yellow, and there's our high poly toad highlighted in yellow. And to see them over here, you might need to switch from the Layers tab over to the Object list. All right, now what we're going to do is transfer all the data from the high poly version of the model over to the low poly version of the model. And we're going to create two types of maps. We're going to first create a normal map, which you guys should be pretty comfortable with the idea of how that normal map works by now. So to do that, we are going to go to UVs and Maps, Extract Texture Maps, New Operation. We want to make a normal map. Next, I'm going to choose the low poly as my target, and then my high poly as my source. Usually turning on smooth source models gives you a better normal map. I'm going to raycast. For the choose samples, we are going to choose the closest to the low res mesh. And then down here, anti-aliasing is a quality option. You can turn it on. If you do, you should not go much higher than 2 times because it affects how long it takes to generate the normal map. I didn't put this in the step-by-step directions because you don't get a huge difference in quality, but yeah. All right, we want this to be tangent space normals. We want to create a texture file, and then next we choose where we want to save it, and we want to save this in the source images folder of our Toad project. Okay, and then we got to give it a name and a file type. For normal maps, you always want to use PNG as your file type. We'll call this Toad normal. Okay, and then you want to turn this option to preview it off. And that's it. We're ready to extract it. As you can see, Mudbox is able to generate normal maps very quickly compared to Maya. It also produces much higher quality normal maps compared to Maya using that transfer maps tool that I showed you guys when you made the couch during your homework assignment. And then we have success. All right. Now, just so you can see that it was actually created, let's go ahead and head over to the desktop. And then look in your project folder under source images. And you should see extra large, you should see the normal map. That is what we just created when we hit extract over in Mudbox. So we can apply that to our low poly model over in Maya and make it look super detailed even though there's not as much information there. All right, so let's go ahead and go back here. Now we're going to make a new kind of map. This is something I haven't talked about. This is something called an ambient occlusion map. What an ambient occlusion map does is it creates details, it creates shadows and dark spots wherever there's wrinkles or deep cracks in your high-res version of the model. Now to do this, we are going to go back to UVs and maps, and then we're going to go to extract texture maps, and we're going to go to new operation, and then click on ambient occlusion map. Once again, we're going to select the target, and we're going to select the source, turn on smoothing, and we don't really need to choose a lot of options in here. I like this. We can just say good or best. Why not go for the best? All right, same thing with anti-aliasing. You can use that as a quality setting as well. And then this stuff you can just leave at the default. Same thing, we're going to put this in the source images folder for our project. We're already there. And this time we are going to change the file type. We are going to change it to a JPEG. And then I'm going to call this Toad AO for ambient occlusion. Same thing, want to turn off the preview. We don't need it. And then extract. I'm going to go ahead and pause while it does this. Okay, so I had to pause it for about a minute or two. So you guys you'll see that it takes a while for it to create it. Of course, that depends on your computer too. If you guys have better computers than I do, it's going to extract it faster. Okay, let's go ahead and check back over in our source images folder, and there you go, guys. That is called an ambient occlusion map. And you can see that any place where there's wrinkles or any kind of deep spots on the toad, we get shadow information there. And what we can do is we can apply this to the low poly model to preserve that shadow information and get better lighting on the model. Okay, next we are going to move over to Maya, and we are done with Mudbox at this point. So the whole purpose of Mudbox was to give us the normal map and the ambient occlusion map, and now we are done with it. And often it's the case that you don't need to save that file, so because the purpose of Mudbox is to generate these image files. So often you don't need to save the mud file. Now later when we do sculpting and we build on previous sculpts, then obviously we are going to have to save the mud file. Or if you're going to have to, or if you need to turn it in for the lab. Okay, let's go back over to Maya. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reload or reopen the low poly version of the toad. And we're going to make a third image file called a light map. And a light map is something that is similar to a normal map, but it doesn't take lighting information into consideration as the model moves. It basically just kind of creates like an image of the high-res version on the low poly version. So let's see, how do we do that? First off, we need to import the high-res version of the toad in here because we're going to transfer the information off of that onto this guy. So let's go ahead and import the high poly toad. All right, and then just to make things easy, and by the way, when you open it, if you see it look like this, you can just click on that to close it. We're going to create layers to hold each of the frogs just to make things easier on ourselves. So for the low poly, let's go ahead and put that in a layer. Okay, and then for the high poly, we'll put him in a layer. Okay, so that's just going to make it easier so we can like temporarily hide the frog just to make it easier to select the one that we're trying to actually work with. All right, next we are going to create a couple lights, and the lights are going to be what allow us to transfer the color information from the high poly over to the low poly toad. So I'm going to create the lights by going to create and then lights, and then I'm going to create a point light. Now you can't see it because it's inside the toad, so if you press W to turn on the move tool, or if you click over here, if you haven't deselected that point light, you'll get little handles around it you can use to move it out of the toad. All right, now it doesn't show the lighting unless you press the number 7 on the keyboard. Now we can see what that toad looks like when I move the light around. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create 3 lights. So I'm going to duplicate this by hitting Control D and then move this light over here. And then I'm going to press Control D one more time and just move another light back here. So, and then I might just move this. Well, I can't really see the light on this. Can't really see his arm too well. I mean, I guess I could make another light and then just put it over here, but it's going to start to get really bright. Let's see, if I kill that one. The other thing I can do is I can turn the intensity down on the light. 0.8. How about 0.5? Okay, there we go. It's got a little bit of a shadow on the top of his head, but that's okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and lower the intensity. This is not in the step-by-step directions because I only told you to make 2 lights in the step-by-step directions. But when I was doing this last night, I was thinking, it's kind of dark when you do that. So maybe I'll update that. It's looking better. Okay. All right. Oops. There we go. All right, I'm liking that. That looks good. All right. Okay, next, we are going to temporarily hide the high poly version. Select the low poly version, and we're going to assign a new material to it. And that's going to be where the file gets attached to when we create it. So to do that, you're going to right click on him, and this is where you guys are not going to see the menu, unfortunately, because the software that I use to record these doesn't, for whatever reason, pick up the menu. But remember, to add a new material, you right click, and then I'm looking over at the thing, you can't see it, and then you scroll down or hold the right mouse button down, and then you're going to go down to where it says assign new material. Okay, and then you're going to choose a blend material for this. Okay, now in order to see the properties for that material, you're going to have to scroll up here all the way to the right to blend number 1, and this is where we're going to see the files getting attached to it later. Now also remember, this window is called the attribute editor. You might have noticed that it changed from a thin box to a bigger one. Remember, you can press Control A to toggle back and forth between the attribute editor and the channel box to get to your properties. Okay, let's go ahead and bring the high-res version of the frog back and hide the low-res. And then I'm going to press Control A to open up the attribute editor again. And there's 2 things we need to do. Number 1, for the color channel, we need to drag that all the way to the right to make the toad appear white. And then we're going to go down to the reflectivity option or setting, and we're going to lower that down to 0 because we don't want it to reflect anything from the environment onto it. Okay, and the way that this frog looks right now, the light in the back is kind of bright. Yeah, let's lower you down. 0.5. That looks better. Way better. All right. So the going back to this guy. So the way that he looks here is the color that it's going to try to transfer over to the low poly model, and that's called a light map. All right. So let's bring back the low poly version, and then we're going to go over to our render settings. I'm going to go to lighting and shading, transfer maps, the same place we went to make a normal map. And then let me see if I can reset this. There we go. Okay. Now, when you do this, it's not going to already have the low-res toad in there. Let me go ahead and say remove selected, just so it looks like what you guys are going to have. Yeah, that's already in there. Proof that I actually do prepare for your guys' lectures, right? All right, so it's going to look like this for you guys. All right, so we're going to choose the low-res toad and then add selected. Choose the high-res toad, add selected. And then down here, what we're going to make is a shaded model. Okay, we are going to choose where to save it. It's going to want to put it in the images folder. Anytime Maya generates an image, it tries to put it in the images folder, but we're going to use this from source images. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the folder and then choose instead the source images folder for my project. And I'm also going to choose the image type to be JPEG, just like my other AO file. And then let's go ahead and name it. I can't remember what I told you guys to name this. Frog. I think I called it frog. Light map. Okay, and save. Okay, there we go. Frog light map, JPEG. We want it to go to the assigned shader. That's going to make it go to that blend material that we added to it a moment ago. And then we want the resolution to be the same as the resolution of the AO file, which was 1024. Okay, and that's it. Let's go ahead and bake and close. Okay, so now if we hide the high poly frog and we press 6 on the keyboard, you can get a hint of what it did. You can see that it sort of took that. So again, this is the low poly frog, not the high poly frog. So it took that detail off of it, the color detail, not like a normal map, and it transferred it over onto the low poly frog. Now we can actually get a better look than this using that map by attaching the image file to a different channel in the material. So I'm going to go ahead and go back over here so we can see. So here's all the files that we've generated to make our shader for the low poly frog. So this is the result of the light map. You can see it looks like that. So it's just like it's taking a picture of the high poly frog and it's like pasting it to the low poly frog. All right, now this is where unfortunately Photoshop would need to come into play. Normally what you would do next is you would put both of these two images into a single Photoshop file as a multiply layer. And what that would do is you'll notice that here on the high poly version that there's some spots that have too much light, like around the ear. And the reason those have too much light is because we literally had a point light off to the side of it. Versus if we look over at the ambient occlusion map, it maintains the darkness in that area. So we would just want to layer those two together, and it would just give us a much better version of the color map plus shadow information. So think of this as shadow information, and this is light information, and we would composite those two together in Photoshop. But again, unfortunately, I don't have Photoshop. Hopefully, I'll find a way to get it to work in the future. But for you guys, you know, if you have Photoshop, go for it. You know, put the two into the same into this. Well, the directions are there in the handout. Put the two together, make one a multiply layer, and that's it. It's actually really, really easy. It's just these few steps right here to make the composite. All right, but we don't have it. So instead, we're going to do this. Over here on our low poly frog, I'm going to go ahead and open up the attribute editor, go over to the blend material that I created, and we can see that it attaches that light map to the ambient color channel. You're going to right click and choose to break that connection, and then we'll no longer be able to see the color map on it. Next, I'm going to delete all my lights. I'm not going to need those anymore. I'm going to delete the high poly version of the frog. Don't need that anymore. So all we have is our low poly frog. Now, if you don't want to have to keep clicking over to do that, the other thing you can do is you can delete the construction history on it. Go edit, delete all by type, and then history. You can see that kind of cleans up the outliner a little bit. All right, so now what we can do is we can start attaching all of those beautiful image files to this blend material to make this low poly version of the frog look very similar to the high poly version of the frog, but at a much lower polygon count such that it could be used in a video game. All right, let's start off with the normal map. So I'm going to go to the bump mapping channel. Click on the mapping button. That's what that little checkerboard's called. We're going to add a file to it. We need to change the use as from bump to tangent space normal. And then we're going to click on the mapping button, click on the folder, and choose your normal map. And click open. And there you go. Just like that, that low poly frog looks super detailed. The power of normal maps. Now, if you don't see it, you need to either press 6. If you have 5 pressed on the keyboard and have software shading turned on, you won't see it. Press 6, you should be able to see it. The other thing is that the renderer needs to be either 2.0 or high quality. If you do this one, it won't show up. So 2.0, it should show up. High quality, it should show up. Okay. All right, next we are going to go to attach our light map, and the light map gets attached to the diffuse channel. So I'm going to go here, choose a file, browse, and choose the light map. Okay, and there you go. So that's the combination of the light map, or I'm sorry, the normal map to give us these highlights for using the normal map, and then just better shadow information using the light map. Now, the other place you can attach it is to the specular roll-off here. So that same file you can attach there. And what that does is you can see that that makes it so that the dark spots, it's not really, let me use, oh, yeah, use 2.0. It does a better job of rendering. It just makes those dark spots stay nice and dark. So you might notice, like, see the highlight right here? If I roll it up here, see how it kind of disappears all of a sudden? And that's because of the specular roll-off. So if you look here at this image file, you can see it's got that dark spot right there. That's what attaching this map to the specular roll-off does. It makes it so that the model can't get highlights in places where it's really, really super dark, where it shouldn't have highlights. All right, we're almost done. Okay, so there's our super detailed looking frog. I mean, that thing looks like it's totally a high poly version, but it's not. Again, that's our low poly frog. And then the last thing we would do is here is I talk about how to create a simple skin texture. But again, this is all done in Photoshop. So unfortunately, we can't create a fancy skin texture for our toad, but we can just kind of do a real small cheat and go over to the color channel of the frog and make him green. And that is it. That's all you guys got to do for lesson number 8 to create a simple shader for a low poly model to make it look like it's a high poly version. All right, if you guys get stuck on anything, don't hesitate to shoot me a message through the inbox, and good luck, you guys.